Welcome to AROYA Office Hours Live. My name is Keisha. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. A couple of reminders before we get started. This hour is your chance to hear from the experts, get answers in real time about data you're seeing with your grow, and share cultivation tips and tricks with other growers in this exciting industry. We thank everybody in advance for not using this time for things like airing policy or industry grievances or asking about AROYA pricing, although please do book a demo. We'd love to work with you. Feel free to type your questions in the chat at any time. If your question is selected, we'll have you unmute yourself and ask away. Plus, as a special treat, we're sending an AROYA hat to anyone who asks a question for the first time during today's live session. We're limiting that to U.S. residents only, and we want to send that one hat per household. So if you already got a hat, thank you for letting somebody else get one. Seth, my friend, happy Thursday.
Hey, Keisha, happy Thursday. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's just me and you today.
Yeah.
I'm going to start asking some questions that we got from Instagram. You ready for the first one?
Sure, let's go for it.
When crop steering, is the idea to match DLI from the last day of the 18/6 vegetative photo period to the DLA of day one of the 12/12 generative photo period? Or are you trying to match PPFD? Please tell me you know what all of that means.
Yeah, of course. We're actually trying to match DLI because DLI gives us the total amount of photons that plant is receiving, in a given area during the daytime. Basically, we want to match, the same number of photons coming from veg into flower. So going about that becomes like, all right, we have PPFD times seconds that the lights are on, and that gives us DLI. So using that equation, we just factor in 12 hours versus 18 hours, and we can get our adjusted PPFD. So, the goal is we want to harden those plants off to light as much as possible in veg so that we're not spending time in flower, production time, building the plant up to be able to take advantage of that higher light environment. So if we can hit the ground running, that's the goal. Get them hardened off, get as much chloroplast made, as much chlorophyll built up as possible. And, remember that the reason we have to harden these plants off to light is because we are cloning them in a low light environment. When you throw a seed out into the field, there we go. The sun doesn't dim down when that thing sprouts. It's just used to full blast from day one, so it's adapting to it throughout its whole life rather than us trying to get it up to speed with this artificial environment.
Yeah, getting that, dialing it all in, so important. Okay, so question 2 from Twisted Pistol. When crop steering, are you increasing VPD as a generative tactic as well as osmotic stress in the beginning of the flowering period, or is increasing VPD only reserved for later in flower?
So early on in flower, we are pretty low VPD. Part of that is because the plant can tolerate it, and we want to slowly increase transpiration in the plant as it gets bigger, and it has the possibility to transpire more. Later on in flower, getting our VPD high is very important because if we go too low on our VPD, aka too high in humidity, we're going to run into issues with botrytis, mold. All of those undesirable things we don't want to deal with. And unfortunately, part of that is later in flower, really avoiding those conditions that could cause things like that to grow. So part of it's for plant health or for plant growth, and then the other part of it's for plant health. Let's put it that way.
Awesome, great. And just a reminder, attendees, if you have any questions about crop steering, sensors, data that you're seeing with your grow, we want to hear from you. So please do type a question in the chat so we can hear from Seth. All right, my friend, I have another question here. All right, this one comes from Chicken Arnold, and he brought up some interesting terms that I had never heard before, so I had to look them up. All right. Does uneven cation, which I looked up, it means positive ions, /anion, which is negative ions, ratio, determine nutrient balance or pH stability?
Well, our pH stability is directly related on that cation to anion balance in our runoff or in the soil or in the nutrient solution in the substrate. So, pH is negative log of our positive hydrogen ions. So as the plant uses up more of those cations or negatively charged ions, the concentration of positively charged ions goes up, resulting in a lower pH. And that's one way, testing runoff that we can tell if the plant's actually giving, taking in the nutrients that we want to give it. We should be seeing a downward trend in pH, not drastically, but slightly, because the plant's taking up predominantly cations. Most of the nutrients we feed it are negatively charged.
Thank you for correcting my pronunciation. I thought it was cation-anions.
Yeah, if you haven't, done, a lot of ionic chemistry or plant studies specifically, it's not a popular word.
That's why we have the expert Seth on here, ladies and gentlemen, and not me answering the questions. All right, we have Chris on with us today. Chris, you had a question. You want to unmute yourself? Tell us where you're from.
We are out of Kingston, Oklahoma.
Welcome, Oklahoma. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I use a recirculating system, and I'm trying to figure out how one goes about crop steering with such a system. Everything I'm seeing these presentations, guys are doing drain to waste, and that's not me, but I'm trying to figure out how to go about doing it. I do use, Rockwell medium. I use the Big Mamas, which are 8-inch cubes, bigger than the Hugos. And feeding the Rockwell, to me, is what it all kind of comes down to. And that's where I'm starting to get really conflicted, figuring out, y'all talk about not getting any runoff, and it's just like there's no way with a recirculating system that I'm not going to have runoff, but my runoff is what's going right back in. So,
right.
I'm trying to figure out, is there, what I have in my reservoir, it should be what's in my cube, or maybe not. I don't know. That's where I'm trying to get some things cleared up and trying to figure out how to go about the crop steering. I feel like my whole career, I've been pushing my plants really hard vegetatively, based on the way I feed. And now I'm seeing the importance of getting dry backs when the time is best for them. So in trying to learn how to do that, I guess I can't get past step one, which is how the hell am I going to do it with a recirculating system?
Gotcha. So are you running flood and drain or a drip system with your recirc?
No, I feed on the top. So I got caps on top of my 8-inch cube that diffuse the water, those FloorFlex caps, and feed from top and drains out bottom, goes into the res, and that's where it's just a continuous circle from there.
Right. So there's a few ways to look at manipulating EC in the root zone. So where you're going for with the recirculating is trying to keep your root zone pretty similar to your feed EC, right? You're constantly flushing everything through the block. Unfortunately, unless you want to constantly adjust that pH, or not pH, but your EC in the reservoir to compensate for everything the plant's pulling out, it's going to be really hard to crop steer there, because what we're really going for in our, generally the crop steering strategies that we promote focus on feeding at a lower EC, say that 2 to 3 range, and then using runoff to control the EC in the media. So more runoff, we're washing EC out the bottom of the pot. Less runoff or no runoff, we're getting it to build up. So with a system that relies on that recirculation, it's probably not going to be very efficient or easy to crop steer. However, being that you already have a pretty great irrigation system built, it wouldn't be easy to turn over to running, say, a 3.0 and starting to get used to modulating your root zone EC via controlling runoff.
Right. And what I wonder about, so, let's say on a Tuesday, I basically go fresh newts, and I'm sitting at a, mid twos EC. And then as the next 3 days go by, I come in on Friday, and the EC in my reservoir is, say, upper 3s, might even be pushing 4, and it's time for a top up. I basically top up, and then that kind of more or less gets that EC back down. But then through transpiration and everything else, it's, my EC is going up in my res, which surely is the same thing in the cubes, right?
Yes and no. It's really tough to say unless you have a sensor in there, because using leachate or runoff to really judge that's pretty tough, because you're trying to look, you're using a charged solution and trying to figure out after you ran it through this media, well, what was not in the media, what got pulled out by the plant, but you're doing that with, a solution that's already a solution. We're not doing it with like deionized water and pulling out just what's in the block. So it's hard to get a lot of meaningful insights out of runoff. Like I said, fortunately for you, you've got a lot of freedom now that you've built this incredibly nice irrigation system, it sounds like. So do you have do you use the Solus or any kind of root zone EC monitoring equipment?
No, I've been good old bro science for damn near 30 years.
Gotcha.
And
yeah. And for years,
about 3 years ago. And with that, becomes, hey, I can actually go learn something and put some science to this. And that's what got me into,
awesome.
to y'all stuff with the crop steering. And I'm sitting there like, okay, best I can tell, I've been crop steering. I just hadn't been going both ways. I've been going one way with it. I mean, I grow humongous plants.
Right.
And my thinking is, okay, I'm probably not finishing them as good as I can because I don't really change the feeding in such that I'm going to actually be getting drybacks. I always just fed 3-4 times a day, pretty much scattered throughout the day. And for 15 minutes, I watered my cube to where the first thing I heard is, as soon as you start watering rockwool and you get in the runoff, you're flushing it. And to me, it's like, well, for me, I don't think I am because I'm just putting back the runoff right back into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, when you're pushing a lot of runoff, like, yes, you are flushing, but, kind of like when people first started getting into cocoa and some of the science was you can't overwater cocoa and perlite mix a little higher EC and just maintain that in the root zone with frequent waterings, which like what you're doing is basically that, right? You're maintaining your EC based on what you've got in the res and frequent watering. So you're not letting it stack up quite as much. So,
right. And then my EC is going up as days go on because the plant's pulling the water out and it's making the EC go up. It's almost like when you guys talk about it, with the drained waste, how you're building that EC and you're layering those feedings on top of each other to do that. It's almost like my reservoir is almost like y'all's cube. It's like my EC is going up in the res because there's water coming out at a faster rate than the newts, which surely is the same thing happening in the cube. And that is the goal, right? You're trying to get the EC higher than the root zone EC, right?
We want your root zone EC to be higher than your feed EC. And that's the whole point of using less runoff to modulate that EC. Part of the idea is...
And then the steering aspect, the generative steering is you're making that plant think that it's not going to get the water and therefore start focusing on reproduction. But you're doing that from the difference in EC in the root zone and by the higher EC in the cube, right? Or am I misunderstanding that?
The generative Q actually has to do with the space between irrigations. So higher EC does put more water stress on by making it harder for the plant to uptake water. But what we're looking for in that generative Q is to actually have, let's say, a 1 to 2 hour irrigation window and then a 22 to 23 hour dryback. In vegetative steering, when we're there, we're giving it those small shots all day. That's like throwing an air stone into your deep water culture tank.
Right.
You're oxygenating those roots and telling the plant to grow, grow, grow. Like when we're doing that, the plant thinks it's raining and sunny at the same time somehow.
And then in general, you're obviously starting out vegetatively, and then at some point you give it a cue to say, hey, wait a minute here. Let's work on some flowers. But then are you taking it back once those flowers set? You're saying, hey, let's grow those flowers real big, or are you still technically in that generative stage? Or are you flipping back to vegetative?
So at times, yeah, depending on the strain, especially we'll go back to a vegetative or bulking phase mid-cycle and then switch back to a generative ripening phase for the last couple of weeks.
So 2 weeks is the general time frame for that plant to actually receive that cue and do something with it.
Your plants will respond faster than you would think to those cues. That's why it's important to, be consistent and not mix up your cues one way or the other. You're going to go generative for a while at the beginning, in early flower while your plant's stretching. You don't want to switch to vegetative for a few days, then switch back to generative and vice versa. You want to finish out that generative phase, go to your bulking phase for a few weeks, and then go to your ripening phase for your final 2 to 3 weeks.
So ripening is about a 2 to 3 weeker.
Yep. In it, honestly, all of these crop steering techniques are very strain specific. I've grown some strains before where we were never able to hit bulking because they started hitting the lights or went above it.
Yeah.
All we could do is run it generatively. You run that one 10 times and go, man, I can't get this thing under control. I'm going to look for some better genetics, because at the end of the day, you got to work with what works in your facility too, to be profitable. Right.
And what to me gets even crazier is the fact that a lot of times you might think it's the genetic, but in all reality, it's the way you're growing it. I mean, it's the way you're feeding it. I mean, if you can grow a monster plant just by giving it water all day, and versus another guy who thinks, no, we don't want to give it water all day. He might have a shorter plant and he thinks that it's a shitty genetic, where the next guy's like, I got these monsters and it's the exact same strain. I mean, how can it be? Absolutely. And that's just why you need, data logging helps so much. It gives us that 24/7 insight to actually see all the differences between those two situations and start to make those choices. If you're just, especially the cyclical nature of farming, once you're, I'm sure 50, 60 crops deep, say on some strains particularly, like if you've grown the same strain 50 times, trying to remember, you remember when it did weird stuff, you won't ever remember what day. Exactly, if you didn't write it down. You'll kind of know, and it's pretty fascinating. I mean, the fact that the plant responds to such nuances, it's something just, as simple as the watering cycle of it. I guess in an ideal world, I would switch to a drain to waste type setup, but that's just not the way my facility's set. So I'm sitting there saying, okay, I know I can crop steer. I just got to figure it out based on my watering. And that's where hearing guys do little 10-second shots, this is like, for one, I can't even feed for less than a minute. I have to go get different timers and such. But I did start experimenting, and I went from 15-minute feedings to 1-minute feedings. And at the end of the day, I saw a lot smaller plants and I was losing yield. And it's like, okay, it's got to be how much we're watering this plant. And it's the longer feedings seem to work much better than when I was cutting them all down, 1 or 2 minute long instead of 15-minute long. And it really got me to thinking that, okay, the way my system is when I feed that cube for 15 minutes, I'm bringing a ton of oxygen in there, and I'm not flushing out all my newts because it's a recirculating system. And surely it's getting me up to saturation point. It's not actually drying out my cube, is it? No, but as far as veg cues go, you would have been better off giving it 15 1-minute shots and ratcheting it up, because that's 15 more air pushes. A steady stream doesn't push in as many bubbles as stream, stop, stream, stop, stream, stop, stream, stop. Right. So you feel like I'd be better off for 15 minutes over an hour feeding for 1 minute as opposed to once an hour for 15 minutes. Absolutely. But it all depends. Honestly, I wouldn't try to make any major recommendations without being able to see some data that's going on in your root zone. Right. That's honestly, to make these choices, that's the biggest thing you're missing in the equation here, is a little bit of that root zone data, so you can say, okay, I think this is what's going on. Now I've confirmed it, or figure out, well, what's going on otherwise. Right. All right, man. Well, I sure appreciate your time on that. Yeah, thanks, man. I don't get to talk to too many people doing research, so appreciate to hear your side of it. We'll definitely keep you posted. Cool.
Yeah, Chris, keep us posted. We love hearing from growers and really speaking to their specific experiences. Every place is not, the same. All growers don't do things the same way. And so it's just been really cool for me to just hear about, what you're doing and what's working for you and what you're trying. And we love that. Thank you so much for that question. And be sure to stick around because I want to get your info so we can send you an AROYA hat.
Well, great. It's awesome to have the forum. I mean, the first time I came across Austin, it's just like, man, I hadn't been able to talk to anyone with anywhere near your knowledge. So that's very, very nice to have. And this legal world we live in is crazy, right? I mean, it used to be, we never talked about this kind of stuff. And now we can go and find people that have a wealth of knowledge. But I appreciate it. Thanks again.
It's exciting time, right, Seth?
Yep. Thanks, man. Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that.
Amazing. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to our next Instagram question. And, we had a couple folks recently join us in the last few minutes. Remember, we want to answer your questions live, so feel free to post in the chat if you have anything you want to ask Seth. I've got a couple questions about some sensor readings. We love data around here. Matrix Underground wants to know, if my sensor is reading 79% when fully saturated, do I just make the corrections of 21%?
I'm assuming you're talking about, as in corrections, like talking about your dryback, or if you're still in here, could you possibly clarify about correction?
They submitted it through Instagram. So, right, they did not clarify.
Right. That's okay. So is like, if you're looking at 79%, like let's say we just hydrated some rock wool, that's what we got up to. If we're looking for a 21% dryback, instead of looking at like 21% of that 79%, we're looking at a 21% reduction in volumetric water content. So 79 down to 58 would be what we're looking for if you call it 21%.
Nice. All right. Okay. We got another write-in from someone. We got a couple emails this week. That gets me excited too. Max Murder came to us with this question. I'm in 1.3 gallon pots of canna cocoa feeding 2.6 to 3.0 EC, 5.8 to 6.0 pH. I measure the runoff daily for percentages and adjust feeds to stay in Vegrogen steering. I also measure the EC and pH of the runoff at the same time. Can you explain what's going on with my runoff pH slowly dropping? It's normally low 5s, but has gotten as low as 4.8.
So that can point to a few things. Obviously, at a certain point, that plant's really hungry. I would be looking at possibly, part of it, like how far into the cycle are you? Are you hitting bulking and your plants are really chomping through your EC? The other thing to look at is like your plants themselves. How do they look? Are we seeing some deficiencies? And then the final thing is, what is your root zone EC actually? Because if you're only judging that from runoff, you're not seeing the full picture. You're getting the lowest point of your EC in the daytime, whereas like your plant might be pushing a super high EC that you're not seeing. And the actual ions that are left behind in that media are going to dictate that lower EC. So we really need to see a little more data to figure out exactly what's going on.
Okay, great. I've got another question here from Instagram. This is from Northeast Labs. And just for everyone who's on with us, let us know what questions you have. We want to talk to you about your data. They want to know, how long should I stay in veg steering after the gen stretch?
Again, that's quite strain dependent, typically 2 to 4 weeks. Like I said, your results may vary. If you've got a strain that really likes to start stretching again or attempt to stretch, or it gets kind of some loose bud structure or more leafy growth, you're going to want to push it less vegetatively or less length of time vegetatively.
Excellent. We got Shark Mouse Farms on with us today. Shark Mouse, you have a question. In your opinion, what is the largest impacting factor in optimizing our osmotic potential in order to maximize our peak EC at each stage?
Well, to be honest, modulating your runoff in order to be able to control that EC precisely and avoiding big swings. And when I say that, like, let's say we're looking for a range of 4 to 8 or 4 to 11 or 5 to 11 EC, that's the exact range we want to stay in. When I say 4 to 11, we're looking not for, like, say, a 5.5 average or 7.5 average. That's the distance we want to see in that swing. When we go really far outside of that, we are going outside of our normal constraints of osmotic stress and adding additional stress to the plant. While that plant's growing, it's building up sugar in its roots in order to still pull in water and nutrients from the environment surrounding it. So I mean, the plant can't adjust the amount of sugar in those root cells as quickly as you and I can adjust the feed EC in the medium. So finding that range where the plant is happy and then being consistent with it is probably the two biggest factors in being able to maximize our peak EC at each stage, or take, the most advantage of the EC we have in the block.
Sharkmouse Farms put us a little note in the chat. Let us know if you got your question answered. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for asking. Let us know if you have any other questions. Okay. So Seth, I got a couple questions this week from Instagram. Someone asked about, do I need to be a licensed facility for the data logger? Someone else asked, when is AROYA arriving in the United Kingdom? So it seemed like maybe our community could use like an overview of, who we support with AROYA, who are, given a general idea of our clients are, what markets they serve. Can you kind of give us an overview of that today?
Yeah. So, I mean, the primary reason that we are only in licensed facilities at the moment is we use in the US, it's not the FAA, but basically the radio frequency we use is business class. So we can't legally sell it to home applications or anyone that doesn't have a business license even. Like, it can be difficult depending on the situation to even get in with some, medical home growers. And that's the only reason is FCC. There we go. FCC radio rules. So one thing we are working on is changing that frequency and bringing, AROYA more to the unlicensed or home growers. I guess the nicest way you could put that. And it's the exact same reason that we're not in the UK and the rest of Europe yet, is we are working on changing that frequency to match their laws over there. So it's not that we don't want to, it's that we focus on one thing in the beginning, and now we're putting our resources towards expanding those hardware capabilities.
Awesome. That's I'm glad we got those questions, because we do field those every once in a while. We will always love our home growers, but we got to follow some rules.
Yeah. I don't know what it's going to be called yet, but I'll just say something kind of like Solus Pro is coming.
Oh,
there's some cool products coming down the line. They're just, it all takes time. This has evolved into such a big platform that, I've only been with AROYA for a year, and it's grown immensely. Like, I couldn't have even imagined some of the directions we're going with it, which is pretty cool.
That is cool. It's exciting. And actually, I think this is like the third week in a row, dropping some little teasers about what's coming down the pipeline. That's why you got to, AROYA office hours is where it's at.
Yeah. It's where you're going to get the inside line.
That's it. Okay, so I got another one for you, Seth. This is my own question. I actually was at an industry event yesterday and came across two growers familiar with AROYA. One was really excited about it. The other was less so. The one who was less excited was like, a computer can't tell me how to grow weed. And I was like, I wonder what Seth would say to something like that. So now's my chance to ask. So yeah, how would you respond if you'd heard something like that?
You know what? There's still always going to be the human factor. There's certainly a huge skill in being able to look at that graph and then determine, okay, you've got to have the mechanical skills to operate your HVAC system, or pay someone to solve that. I mean, you either have to know how to fix all these problems or make these adjustments, or pay someone who does. And that's certainly a reality. But at the end of the day, using a computer or science is going to allow you to optimize your efficiency in the situation. So like, yes, you can do absolutely great by feel, no doubt. But are you going to be able to repeat that the same way? Are you going to be able to optimize it? This would be like saying, can I crop steer by hand watering? And the answer is kind of, but probably not as precisely as you could with technology.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in my opinion, I think, the people that aren't excited about it, one of the main things they're worried about is, and maybe this is consciously or subconsciously for some of them, but now we're quantifying and evaluating every part about it. That thing you did that was your special sauce, like, I used to think irrigating 6 to 8 times a day was pretty special. Like 6-7 years ago, I was like, wow, my weed grows super fast compared to my buddies in these big pots watering every other day. But in reality, now that I have, data logging equipment, I can actually be way more efficient about it. But at the time, I was like, yeah, that's super cool. Like, I made this observation. It seems to be reliable. It works. But now I can take that to the next level using tools like Arroyo.
So let's talk about that a little bit more in detail. Like, in general, let's touch on what is crop steering, and then does Arroyo help enable cultivators to do it?
Crop steering is just the manipulation of your environment and irrigation in order to optimize plant growth or steer it in a direction we want. So basically, by applying different types of stress, we can directly impact plant morphology. And by doing it over and over and recording the results, we can predictably impact plant morphology. So the idea is, we're applying specific irrigation strategies that end up producing both osmotic stress and, in extreme cases, drought stress within the plant, and also applying in vegetative steering, minimal stress and giving the plant everything it needs plus some in the form of all those little oxygen pulses to continue growing. So crop steering is basically just strategic use of your facility and resources to produce the results you want. People have been doing it since they figured out how to prune grapes. It's not new. We've just put new words on it. And again, Arroyo is helping people really, really dial it in and repeat those results. That's the key, really, is, building a recipe that you can repeat.
Getting that consistency, which the patients and customers want.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important for your business. I mean, for any producer, you want to be able to have a basically guaranteed amount of product that you can sell every month or every other month or whatever your interval is. You want that to be the same or increasing. If you're locked in on square footage, you don't want, unless you're planning on getting some crazy premium for a strain that does not yield well for you, you always want to maximize that. That's the nature of business, I think.
Yep. Keep on growing. All right. Well, I actually have asked all of the questions submitted so far. Maybe our attendees in this last couple minutes here, if you have any questions that for Seth that we can touch on, we'd love to hear from you. But, until that happens, Seth, you excited for 420? What are you doing?
Yeah. Actually, what day is 420 next week?
Next Wednesday?
Well, I'll be in Portland visiting some weed farms, so something fun.
Well, I'm glad I brought it up, and everybody else is on with us. Happy almost 420. Our next broadcast will be after 420, but I don't know. It's certainly on my mind. It's my favorite time of year.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, I think maybe that's it.
I just saw one pop up in the in-call messages.
Oh, yeah.
There's some of the biggest features of kiosk.
Yes.
What are some of the biggest features? I'll start with that and I'll get back to you, Chris. Basically, kiosk is an awesome way to have that tablet mounted somewhere in your facility and to have a gauge view of that room. So instead of staring at graphs, you can go look at some quick averages, get an idea, and move on with your day, and also go check, the tasks associated with that room or log in and view your tasks. But for me, the biggest feature is the at a glance look. Hey, this is simplified. I don't have to make sure and check that I'm in the right room, looking at the graph. Nope, this kiosk lives here. It's displaying this room data. There we go. And also allowing people to not, employees to still access their tasks without getting their own phone all sticky. That's probably huge as well. As far as Oklahoma goes, Chris, I have not personally been down there for this job yet. But we'll get down there. We have quite a few customers in Oklahoma, and we're always looking for more. In fact, we're working on metric integration in Oklahoma as well.
And sorry, we got one more here from Sharkmouse. He wants to know, I'd like to get your thoughts on UV inputs since the peer-reviewed data is so conflicted.
I think UV could be important. We could be missing out on something there. But at the same time, for years of growing under HPS and LEDs that aren't UV supplemented, the herb still turns out great. So I think, unfortunately, I have to agree with you. The peer-reviewed data is pretty conflicted at the moment, with people finding some significance and others finding no significance. And, for all we know right now, it could be kind of like there's an argument, about a decade ago with molybdenum and nickel as essential plant elements. And depending on what varieties of the same plants they tested it on, they got different results. So in that specific case, there was a lot of research, and in the end, it was like, well, some need it, some don't. So that's kind of how I feel about UV. It's awesome if you can afford it. but I wouldn't worry about it.
Shark Mass Farms, great question. Thank you so much. Things are just changing so fast, right? Like constantly.
Oh yeah.
Seeing your comment here about metric. Everybody's favorite topic, but it has to be done. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. That's what we say about metric around here. Amazing. Yeah, no, Seth, it looks like Chris is ready to host you.
Yeah. I haven't been to Lake Texoma in about 25 years. So, maybe it's time to go back down there. Who knows?
Awesome. Well, this has been a great show. I think those are all the questions we have for today. Seth, we held it down. I hope you're
we made it through. I was scared without Jason, but we can lean into you, Cation, and it worked out.
We're two peas in a pod, just talking about cannabis. It's so exciting to have all you folks on with us today. Chris, just want to point out for you personally, please stick around for just a few more minutes so I can get your contact info. But thank you all so much for joining us for this week's session of AROYA Office Hours Live. If you have any questions about AROYA, how it can be used to improve your cultivation production process, or any other topic you would like for us to cover in a future Office Hours episode, please let us know by sending us a message in the chat. Shoot us an email at support.aroya@metergroup.com or send us a DM over Instagram. We want to hear from you. We record every session. Everybody who's on today will receive an email link to the video by email, rather. And then we'll also put the video on our AROYA YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and share while you're there. And if you find these conversations helpful, please feel free to share with your network and spread the word. We'll look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Cation.